seems like as the international signees get younger, you get more distance from when they sign to when they theoretically would be going to college, even if they're making a big amount of money in college. That kind of makes it difficult, right? To envision these kind of guys going to college as they're getting signed younger and younger.
It's happening, is what I'll say. It's happening more, but we have to zoom out all the way here in order to really understand why that can't really be, or why it can't be possible. Because if you think about the way the Latin American scouting structure operates, especially right now, where I think we are as an industry just scouting players so young, like we're having like 13-year-old, 14-year-old kids, like, and you're making decisions on them. And so think about that, right? Like you have a 13-year-old kid you're making a decision on. That kid knows now he's got to be ready to be evaluated by 14, 15, or really 13, 14, 15, knows he's got to be ready by that point. His trainer knows he's got to be ready for that point. So at what point do you start making that your everyday focus as a kid? 2-3 years before that, that puts you in 10, 11, 9, 10, and 11 as to when you kind of drop school. It goes by the wayside. So when you think about it from that standpoint,
it's insane,
right? Like you abandon the education component so early that in order to then qualify for high school, let alone college on the domestic side of things, and that's all in Spanish, by the way. We haven't even touched the English speaking. Now, you can take an ESOL type path in high school or college, but that's not easy either, right? And so you're just compounding a lack of overall education. And that's not for everybody. Some kids end up getting a complete education in these countries, but it's in the minority amongst the baseball playing population. More often than not, like you go watch a kid in the middle of a week on a Tuesday at 10 a.m. or a Tuesday at 11, and he's available for that tryout. He's not like, oh no, he's got school, he'll be back after school. Like, he's available. Therefore, he's not going. Or they'll set up these systems where they go to school. Their entire school structure is stacked into Saturday. So they'll go to school on Saturdays. And, I think anybody who's been through an education system knows, like, you can't condense it all into 3 hours in an afternoon once a week. And so when you look at it from that lens, it's more understandable why we don't see more of it. That doesn't mean it's not possible, and that doesn't mean we won't see it. But I think the younger you scout them, the younger they abandon school. And the younger they abandon school, the lower the education base to then, now learn English and apply to a college and play Division I college sports. It's a long arc. It's a long way to go. And I think that's why we don't see much of it. And why you see, what you mentioned, these guys might get there theoretically a little earlier, but a lot of them are starting their professional careers at 16 versus a kid out of high school at 18 or 19, or a kid out of a junior or senior out of college at 22, 23. So like those years are spent in professional baseball in the minor leagues, which is the first place they actually do start to get some education for a lot of these kids. That's what I felt good about with the Marlins, for example. Like, the Marlins have a really strong program of getting kids their high school degrees, and at least getting them to a high school compatibility GED level graduation certificate. And a lot of other teams do that as well. But a lot of the times, and I know because I speak to the educators they intake these kids for the first time. And the overall base level of education varies from country to country, but it goes in the exact direction you think it does as the area gets poorer and as the economic conditions worsen in terms of literacy rates, even abilities to like write or sign names are limited. And so a lot of kids just have a long way to go on that front. And getting into a college in the United States is not easy if you don't speak English and if you don't have some curriculum. So
you think about someone who's made it work, right? Travis Bazzana, who was first pick of the draft, international college, big time college, but Australia, right? So the English part was there. I know you've mentioned on prior shows, Bahamas maybe could be one where you still have some of the same issues as far as the age and the timing, but at least on the education component, you have English backgrounds and maybe a raw prospect. You could go to a JUCO or go to a school that could pay a little NIL, and then you develop from there. I know that's a big area that you've focused on. Do you think that could be something, knowing what you know about the college game, now being around that more, and then the Bahamian market, could there be a marriage there between international and college?
I think so, for sure. And I think you are seeing it because one thing I didn't mention was the contraction of minor league players. So like there's less minor league players and therefore less minor league opportunity. So players that would have played back end of the minor leagues are now more in consideration for JUCOs or Division II or NAIA type. And I think you're seeing that. There's also some ability to bounce back. If you do get released out of a professional program, you do have some NAIA and D2 eligibility remaining. I've seen that happen too. But you mentioned the most important thing. Those countries speak English. And what we're talking about is assimilating into an American education system that functions fully in English. And you can have maybe, an ESOL program that functions a lot in Spanish, but when you get to college, your coach is going to speak English. All the players on your team are going to speak English. So like that English component is a big one. And unless you went to a school that focused on it in the country that you're from, and some education is more ingrained into the cultures of some countries than in others. Right. So Curacao has a high level base of education. Even like Venezuela had in a previous era had a higher base level of education and still does to a certain extent. But it's important to see how much education is a part of the culture that they're coming from. And therefore, after that, you can extrapolate out who's got a better chance to make this transition. But English is a big one.